Welcome to the Midlife Masquerade podcast, where we're reinventing ourselves and writing life's next chapter together. I'm your host, Kine, and I'm here to support you and share inspirational stories from some friends. So let's get cozy and figure it out together. Hi, everyone. Today I'm thrilled to introduce Serena Sax-Mandel, the Global Chief Tech Officer for Education at Microsoft, where she's making big waves with her work in generative AI in education. But what truly sets Serena apart is her extraordinary story, from overcoming childhood trauma to battling cancer twice, and now leading the charge in education. Her story embodies resilience, the impact of framing your narrative and finding your purpose. Thank you so much, Serena, for joining me today. I'm so excited to talk to you. I just got your book and I have so many questions for you. I really appreciate you sitting down to have this discussion with me. But before we do, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. And thank you so much for the invitation. And I've just enjoyed getting to know you and working with you so far. So I'm looking forward to this. I'm Serena Sax-Mandel. I am the author of this book, Empowered: Writing Your Narrative, Own Your Power. And in my professional life, I'm the Global Chief Technology Officer for Education at Microsoft. And let me just use the disclaimer that I am representing myself, not Microsoft here.
Okay, great. And today we're going to dive into a lot of these impactful experiences that really shaped who you are. And so I'd love to first start off about your childhood. That's actually where you start off in your book. And so I'd love to take a deeper dive. I know you grew up in New York and you had a pretty traumatic childhood. Can you paint us a picture of what your life as a child was like?
Sure. So overall, from a high level, there was no safety, there was no security. I felt very much isolated and I was on my own. I was make it or break it on my own. What you'll see in the book is my mother's pregnancy with me was unplanned and unwanted. I was the youngest of four, and my mother was in an abusive relationship with my father. And so I understand why, on a theoretical level, she did not want another child. And it was extremely difficult for her to have yet a fourth child. And I was a witness to the abuse and sometimes target. So it's a very, very difficult time. And that's kind of what I go through. It doesn't matter what my parents did or said or thought of me. What matters is what I make of myself and how I impact this world and how I use my life. So that, they say, birth is a year, then there's a dash, and then a year when you pass, what do you do with your dash? And I want to make my dash count. So it doesn't matter what their issues were, what their problems were. Those don't define me. Only I get to define myself. And that's the foundation.
I think you have such an incredible story of how you took charge of your life and reframed your narrative. In your book, you talk about before the age of 5, I witnessed my father try to kill my mother 3 times, but it was the stairs and the brass gate that haunted me most. My father propelled my mother downward, her life hanging by a thread, and miraculously she clung to the rail, defying gravity. Can you tell me about this moment?
Yeah, it still hurts to think about it. So my parents built the house that I grew up in, and my father loved to kind of reclaim pieces from other buildings that had been kind of torn down. So he bought this brass gate from an old bank. So it was a bank gate. It was what you would imagine a very, very heavy wooden brass gate that would, in a bank, go back to like behind the tellers. Very, very ornate and beautiful and heavy. And that gate stood at the top of the stairs in our house. Our bedrooms were upstairs and a playroom and other rooms were downstairs. And so I lived in that house for the first 13 years of my life. And I can still see it. I can still see that gate that I saw every single day. It was in our front hall. And, it was kind of just seared in my memory and my brain that, my father trying to choke my mother in front of the front door and then later pushing her down the stairs. And so he was physically abusive. But I will say that in my experience, emotional abuse actually leaves deeper scars than physical. So my mother healed and she is still with us. She'll be 88 this June. But it's the emotional scars. And I also think that watching abuse is worse sometimes than experiencing it. I talk about another story where my father was abusive to my brother, and my brother actually blocked that out for most of his life. He only recalled it a few years ago, and he gave me permission to put that in there, but he doesn't really remember it. He only remembers what I said and what I reminded him. So it was seared in my brain and was an early memory, just very scary, very isolating, where a child needs safety, security, and a strong foundation. I didn't have that. So I just had to create it for myself.
That sounds horrific. I mean, to witness, especially the two most important people in your life, especially at that age, hurting each other or one hurting the other and coming to near-death scenarios. How did that change your perception of relationships or how a woman is supposed to act or your self-worth?
There's so much there. I just want to say that the takeaway for the larger audience is that domestic abuse and violence crosses all lines: geographic, social, economic, educational, financial, every single line. There are no barriers. So it's about individuals. It's not about any type of person. And so you just don't know what goes on beyond doors and inside a family. We had an absolutely gorgeous house that was incredibly decorated. And yet there was this unsafe, abusive environment. I think that it gave me tremendous empathy for my mother. I felt almost as a child that our roles were reversed, that I wanted to take care of my mother. I wanted her to be safe. I wanted her to be there. And you will see in the book that there was also abuse from her. My mother was not an easy person. She was definitely not the best mother. It was always hard to buy a Mother's Day card because you couldn't just use the superlatives that most mothers deserve. But on the other hand, I deeply, deeply loved my mother. As a child, I guess I just suppressed all emotion and feeling until I could sort of process it. I will say when I was in first grade and my parents were divorcing, I do remember my mother had to pick me up from school every day because I kept getting sent down to the nurse's office for temper tantrums and uncontrollable crying. So that year that they were divorcing just really hit me hard. And I remember the other kids in the class calling me a crybaby, and, that didn't help. But first grade was very, very tough. And I think that it was a result of all of these things kind of coming out. I remember when I was probably in single digits ages, and we're Jewish, so we celebrate Hanukkah, not Christmas. But we felt so bad for my mother. She was single, she was suffering. It was after the divorce, but there was just so much trauma still. And we had very little pocket money. We got a few dollars here and there. We didn't have regular allowances. My mother couldn't afford that, but my father would give us some money once in a while. So the three of us lived with her, and we pooled our money, and we only bought things for her. We bought her like a little perfume bottle and just a few things for her. So we didn't give each other any gifts. We just used our money to buy something for my mother. And at the time, it felt like we wanted to express our love and our caring. We wanted her to be okay. Looking back, as an adult, that's so sad. I have empathy for my inner child. We all have an inner child, and we all have moments. Mine might be overly horrible, but everybody has a moment. I knew spending weekends with my father and having him be abusive wasn't right. And even then, I remember thinking, I should write a book about this. This is just horrible. Nobody will believe it. But it took obviously many, many decades before I was able to write about it. From a professional standpoint, it was opaque, right? You don't let these things show. So this is a little bit scary going out there, kind of mixing the personal and the professional and exposing what I've been through. I just got an email from one of my uncles who read the book, and he knew my father. And my father passed away decades ago, so he's not around. And my uncle said, oh my gosh, he was just such a horrible person. And he said just reliving it was just horrible for him. That he didn't know, like most of my family didn't even know the depths of the problems that were going on. But maybe not surprising because they knew him.
I think that to a lot of people's experiences where you're very alone when you're going through these things because other people's perceptions of your parents are whoever the person is very
Yeah. I'll just say my father was a veterinarian, so he took care of animals and clients all day. And he was a golf champion. He was a scratch golfer for 13 years, and he was club champion, and he was a celebrity, and he had his golf club. So he was, the man, and he had a huge charisma. People respected and liked him. He had a great sense of humor. People loved him. And then, of course, all his clients thought he was wonderful, taking care of these dogs and cats, and just so empathetic. And the reality behind the scenes was very different.
That must have been so confusing and conflicting for you. I mean, on so many levels, first being your parents, the ones that are supposed to protect you and keep you safe, or the ones that are hurting you. And then you also have this dichotomy of how they're perceived in society versus how they are to you. That must make you wonder, well, what's going on with me?
And as a girl, I just wanted my father to love me, and I just wanted him to see me. And the fact is that my sister had a very different temperament, and he loved her more. And it was obvious that her temperament worked better with him. And, she doesn't have the same perception of him that I do. And so there was all the, relationship drama. Maybe that's why I married my ex-husband, because he was 12 years older than me, So it did screw me up. It did mess me up pretty badly, but I just keep overcoming it. Really a story of triumph and overcoming, not wallowing.
Yeah, absolutely. As I'm reading through your book, I see this overarching theme of where you come against a lot of huge obstacles and you're able to overcome them, and get to that in a little bit. I also want to note that in your book, you also talk about your mother. You guys had a complex relationship. I think at one point in your book, you say that the first memory you had was of her covering your face with a pillow. So you had two parents that really, really did abuse you in very traumatic ways. And then although they got divorced, that divorce itself was, you said, I think a 13-year long process.
Well, I was 18.
Oh, yeah. And so you were still going through it, even though they did finally divorce. You still continue to have issues with both of them.
Right. It was horrific. And it went on, and went from the frying pan to the fire when my mother remarried. I loved my stepfather, John, but my mother and I moved into his house with 4 of his kids, and they created a room in the basement for me. My step siblings were also abusive. They violated my privacy. They were physically and verbally abusive, and that was a very difficult situation as well. And especially because my stepfather thought his kids could do no wrong.
It sounds like even though your family dynamics changed, it still didn't really improve, because then you were still, again, treated as a second priority to your step siblings. And also your father remarried as well. And they led seemingly a more richer life, where they're going to the country clubs and driving really nice cars. And it seems like your mother was still trying to figure it out with you guys financially. Can you tell me more about how you felt when you would have to spend your time with your father's new family?
Yeah, and I have to say, this actually still haunts me in weird ways today, because we had forced visitation. So we had to go to my father's. He would spend the whole weekend golfing. We might see him for an hour here or there, and then Sunday night he would abuse us for an hour or two before we went home crying. But during the time, we would go to the country club with my stepmother and step siblings. And this country club had so many rules, and it was very ritzy. And we didn't have Bloomingdale's clothes and white for tennis. A lot of kids that grow up maybe with less money than others don't really notice, because they all talk about, oh, I had love and that's what mattered. Or I didn't even know I was poor. Well, I knew I was poor. I knew I had one pair of raggedy sneakers and maybe a pair of jeans, and they were a hand-me-down. All my clothes were hand-me-downs, as I had very few things. Back in the 80s, that's when everybody had an alligator or a polo on their shirt. So when I had my one Izod alligator shirt got too small, I cut off the alligator. They got a cheap polo shirt, and I sewed that alligator on the cheap shirt. And so that I had an alligator on my shirt, just like everyone else. But I knew that I had less than. It was like living in this fishbowl where you're getting kind of thrown something in your face all the time and treated less than. Like I said, emotional abuse can be worse than physical, but it just sticks with you when you just don't have enough and you get told that all the time.
Yeah, I can definitely relate. I think especially during your teenage years, those brand names and those get into the discussions and kids do make comments and it becomes a source of bullying. And it's really silly looking back at it as an adult, but it does happen. Your parents made you know that you were an unplanned pregnancy and all of their actions, they neglected you and made sure that you felt like, or you absolutely knew that you weren't a priority. And it was starting to manifest and you had these conflicting roles where you were the daughter, but also having to take on the responsibility of having to emotionally care for your mother, who again was also abusive to you. So there's just so much going on. It sounds like this trauma manifested later on. And I think in your book, you mentioned that you were going down a bad path and indulging in unhealthy activities. And then later on, caring teachers, guidance counselors, and you say my aunts and my mother all helped me through it in the end. So can you tell me more about just that piece? Like, when did that switch over? I see this child that is feeling very unworthy and feeling like they're more burdensome than anything else and starting to make unhealthy decisions because they themselves aren't feeling like they're worth making great decisions for. So can you tell me a little bit about that shift?
So let me just be clear that when children are difficult from an adult perspective, that actually might be serving them well when they become an adult. And I kind of see myself that way. So I was a bit of a defiant child. I was very rough and tumble. I was very tomboyish. I played every sport. I did everything physically, but I also knew education was going to be critical. So no matter how bad I felt and all this chaos going on around me, my father's second divorce and then his third marriage and all this craziness and not being wanted and being kind of put out on the side, it made me actually more defiant. And that may be part of my personality, but it was more like, I am here and just, you're going to have to deal with that. But that became, how can I make the world better versus how can I be angry at everyone? So the danger that I would have gone down is anger turned inwards, anger against myself. So doing harmful activities, which I indulged in. And then I could have been angry at the world and angry at everybody else. But I have turned that into caring and love and empathy for everyone else. And it's not that I'm special. It's just what I decided and I chose them. You know, I say early in the book, I wasn't the smartest, the cutest, the strongest, the most ablest. I wasn't any of those, but I had grit. You know what? I survived for a reason, and I'm going to figure out what those reasons are and that purpose. And I don't want to say I didn't have any lover support because I knew my mother loved me. My father was, and both of my parents was very conditional. It was very conditional. It was like, I'll love you if you're successful. My aunts didn't live anywhere nearby. I had one in Boston and one in Virginia. But when I saw them, there was an embrace and a support. And I had, I got to credit some teachers that I had. I took a psychology class in high school that really helped in journaling. My husband helped me write this book, and he was saying the same thing. Like, how did you overcome this? Like, you are really about to be a bad statistic. And I'm like, I know. And I said, well, I'm not quite sure. He went in our storage boxes and found my diary from my junior year. But he was like, do you know that you did this? And I'm like, I did? Oh my God, I was bad. And we tried to pinpoint what the turnaround was. And as much as I had self-anger, I had self-hatred, so I did negative, bad things that hurt me, I just had a drive that I knew I needed to be self-sufficient. I knew I needed to take care of myself. And I did. I started college at 17 and graduate school at 19. And I had some inner strength, maybe had angels above. Something was propelling me forward instead of inward anger, which is part of most teenagers anyway. I think I've got angels up the beam sound.
I think you're a very powerful person. It sounds like it took this huge introspective piece that maybe you don't recall, but to even ask yourself these types of hard questions. And maybe it also came out of necessity, because I think it sounds like you, from a very young age, could not depend on your parents or other people.
Yeah. I had to be strong. I had to suppress all emotion and feeling, which is not healthy, but that's what helped me survive. What I learned as an adult, things that help you survive are not necessarily things that help you thrive later. But I had no use for emotions. Let's just keep moving forward. When I was 6 and 7 years old, I was negotiating with my father to get us medical payments, to pay for the optometrist treatment. He refused to get me braces. I now have aligners now at this stage of life. But I remember being on the phone arguing, and that was so wrong of my father to engage and my mother to be behind me cheering. Like, that was just wrong. But that's who I was. I was freaking strong. And I was the strongest one around, regardless of my age. And I think it's just that inner strength, and you could call me bratty or whatever, but I was going to be moving forward, and I only had myself to rely on. And that's why I just kicked butt. When I went to college, I got myself my driver's license. I started a residence governance organization on campus. I did extremely well in my courses, and then I got a job and I worked my way through school. And I had a long professional resume when I graduated. You have a lot of energy when you're young. I would just get very few hours of sleep and work, study, just inner strength.
Do you, in some ways, feel like you were trying to prove that you were worth the fight?
Yeah, I'll show you. My father's saying he's not going to pay for college. I mean, that was fuel. It was, I'm going to do this. I will show you. I know he was proud of me. I know. But I was like, you know what? I did this despite you, not because of you, not with you, not leaning on you. So yeah, there was some spite in there.
It's an incredible shift in your story to take charge of your narrative and then also use that anger for something healthy and good. I'm curious, you mentioned the psychology class and journaling. So when you took the psychology class, was it the time that kind of initiated this introspectiveness to say, okay, I'm so angry and I'm hurting and I'm in so much pain and I'm making all these bad decisions to continue to hurt myself? Was this journaling technique or maybe the psychology class, the impetus that helped you? What do you recall of that period?
So it helped me be more of the observer and kind of go above myself and take stock. And at that point, I had a horrible life in the house I was living in. The house I was living in was not safe in terms of the siblings being abusive, physically and verbally, and lying, stealing, all these horrible behaviors towards me, anger towards me, because my mother had moved in and they couldn't be angry at her, so they were angry at me. And then in addition, just trying to have a relationship with my father, trying to heal that relationship in some way, and that being very traumatic. And the psychology class, the practice of journaling helped me, get that out and see it from an observing standpoint and get perspective. It's so long ago and it is a little bit fuzzy, so I can't tell you, well, like, this is what I learned. No, it was more of the practice of being an observer of your own life and your own circumstances and your own situation, and getting that perspective that this is just what it is right now. One of my best advice for all parents of kids in school is tell your students, whether they're middle school or high school, you don't want to peak in high school. So just give them that perspective that this isn't the time you're supposed to be your best self. This is the time you're growing, you're trying, you're learning, you're making mistakes, and then you overcome them. Kids have a hard time putting the day in perspective, putting the fight with their friend in perspective, right? And they think, oh my God, this is my whole world. This is never going to change. This is how it always going to be. I'm always going to feel this way. And so I think the one thing that psychology course got in my brain is that this is just a moment in time. This is just a moment in time. And every teenager has to know that this is a moment in time and you have the power to direct it any way you want. And you can make a decision and then make another decision and then make another decision. So your choices aren't forever. They're right now. And having that sort of longer term perspective, I think that helped me saying, okay, I screwed up junior year, but I'm going to do better senior year. I'm going to get into college. So I think that was the turning point.
I think that's a really powerful message, realizing that it's just a moment in time. I feel like that is very applicable to even older women, because I think a lot of life decisions seem so big and impactful. And especially if you have anxiety, you can just have tunnel vision and just think about the future and how there's going to be this domino effect based on this one decision. And it's really good to remind yourself that it's just a moment in time. There's not this permanence to most of the decisions that you're making.
This decision is not deterministic for the rest of your life. And sure, where you end up in college is going to have impacts, and you can't go back and live a different life, but you can keep making new decisions. Like I know people that have gone to med school and then become game designers. So you could follow a course for a while and then you can get on another course.
I think that is very profound, and going back to finding your purpose, that takes the pressure off of having like a singular purpose or this permanent purpose, and that allows you to focus more on the important aspects. I really appreciate you sharing those, traumatic stories, and I know it can't be easy because they're very emotional, and I appreciate you trying to remember what you can about your journals and sharing that part as well. And I just want to point out one part in your book. You say, it has taken many pain-filled years, an enormous amount of reading, self-reflection, therapy, and workshops to overcome my self-loathing. A healthy mindset did not come naturally to me. I've done the work to get here. And that part really stood out to me. There's very much a jump between before and after. And you go, before I was this, and then I became this. And this part, I feel like you hit it directly where you're talking about that middle part, the work that it took to get there, because it's not easy and it's this long process. And we come to expect this instantaneous gratification, especially with, what we see in the media and everything else. Can you talk a little bit more about just how long the journey has been? And I know that this journey is not linear, and there is these times where there are numerous setbacks, but you don't ever really hear it. So can you talk about that middle part and that self-loathing and that length of journey?
So I'll just say there's no overnight success. People, like you said, that you see the one day, you see the next, like, oh my gosh, there's success. Taylor Swift. No, Taylor Swift been doing it since she was like 10 years old, and now she's 30 something. So there's no overnight success. And emotional work on yourself is like an onion. You think you've done it, and then you're like, oh, there's another layer. Oh, now there's another layer. And it's iterative. So it's not like you do the work and it's done. It keeps coming up. You have triggers that make you look at it again and again and again, and with different eyes, with different nuance, because you've learned and you've grown and you've had a different experience since then. So I would say when I was in my teenage years, there was no counseling, there was no therapy. I actually started therapy when I was in my 20s. And I think that everybody should go to therapy when they're in their 20s. Everybody has to put their childhood in perspective, put their parents in perspective, and make that transition from being a child to an adult. And the years from 20 to 29 are when you have to do that. Because when you are turning 30, a lot of people kind of freak out and go, okay, I'm going to be an adult now. So do that hard work. I had traditional talk therapy during that time that helped me tremendously. For the first time in my life, I could share some of the things that I put in the book. And my therapist was empathetic. And she said, oh my gosh, you had a horrific childhood. I was like, oh, I did. He says she gave me perspective that I had just somewhat normalized. And the other thing I got from that perspective was, here I thought my father was the bad guy all the time. My father, my father, my father, my poor mother, my poor mother. Well, she helped me see that my mother wasn't ideal either. And that's when we uncovered some of those memories of my mother doing some abusive things as well. And so it became much more nuanced. And she helped me see they're individuals with their own problems, with their own issues. It was whatever. that caused them to be that way, not me. It wasn't about me. But later I did lots of other work. I did workshops, I did regression therapy, and during the regression therapy is when I found out that this feeling of I shouldn't even exist, which I felt every single day, went back to uterus. It went back to when I was in my mother's uterus prior to being born. And so he had me talk to what was my mother going through. And I knew. So it's like, oh my gosh, so this feeling came from there. And it also helped me separate it. Like, okay, this is an emotional thing that I took on from my mother, but I don't have to carry that. So I'm not saying that it goes away completely, because then when I had cancer, I was like, well, you know what? I wasn't supposed to be here to begin with. I've lived a good life. I've helped students. I've helped this. I'm good. I'm out. So there's these layers. There's these layers that you go through.
And so I want to go back to your story. You essentially went through this traumatic childhood. You figured out how to use that anger to prove your worth. So you're on this better or healthier trajectory. Then that's not where your trauma ends. You end up being diagnosed with cancer. Can you tell me more about that phase in your life?
Oh my gosh. Oh, I was so angry. I was CIO at Fulton County Schools. I was so busy every day, every way, morning, night, evening, doing nonprofit and working for the school. The doctors had the audacity to tell me I had cancer. I was like, are you freaking kidding me? I don't have time for this. I was so angry. It was ring surgeries in 10 days for them to diagnose it. So the last thing you want to hear is, well, you've got rare and aggressive cancer. And after like 10 million times of them saying, don't worry, it's not cancer, it's not cancer, it's not cancer. And then having a doctor come in and say, well, we're going to just take out all your female organs. And I'm like, oh, no. You're going to check me out and I'm going to go home and that's that. I am not losing my organs because those are part of who I am. And that doctor threw his card down at my bedside and said, call me when it's all over your body. And literally, I would have died within a year because the cancer I had metastasized to the liver and brain. And we find an oncologist who I trusted. So she's like, well, we have to do the surgery. We got to take that out. And I thought that would be it. And then she's like, oh, no, you have to start chemo on Monday. I'm like, oh, no. I didn't agree to that. And then my kids begged me. They wanted me to see them graduate. And I finally said, okay, fine. I was so angry. And this is where I say attitude matters, because I went through that first 6 months of chemo, like just angry. And it was not fun at all. And then within a few weeks after the chemo stopped, the cancer came back. And it was doubling every 10 days. And I went up to Harvard Medical and they did a CAT scan there and it had metastasized to my lungs already within like a few weeks, right? So I went up to Harvard with my daughter and my sister, and somehow they convinced me that my life was worth living and that I should fight this. And something inside me took that strength that I had as a 5 and 6 year old and just said, you're going to do this. We're going to kick cancer's ass this time. And that's why I say attitude matters. So instead of just one chemo, it was orders of magnitude more. They basically were killing me every week and reviving me. Never stopped working, never stopped going to breakfast meetings and evening meetings and everything. And I was living alone. I was alone, and that was hard, not having a partner. But my chosen family, the people I work with, my friends, my extended family supported me. And I kicked cancer's butt. But the following year was the worst. The year after is worse because everybody goes away, everyone disappears, and all the chemicals are in your body polluting it. My joints hurt, my organs, I had reflux, I had everything. I could barely move, and I was dizzy, and I never stopped working, but I felt like crap, and I was depressed, and I didn't care whether I lived or died because I was in so much pain every day, and somehow I just kept putting one foot in front of the other. And at this point, my mother, who had Alzheimer's, I had moved down from North Carolina to be near me. And so every day I would go to work, I would go to the hospital, I'd see my mother. It was just, I was taking care of my mother or myself or my job. And it was exhausting. So when I first thought that cancer was gone, I went right from the hospital to the Himalayan Children's Charity. And I sponsored a little girl named Nepalese orphan, and I paid for her school. And so 11 months after I finished chemo, I trekked Mount Everest. I met her and I had a spiritual experience in Nepal, but I still wasn't better. Still was physically not myself. And a few months later, I actually ran a 5K. I did all these crazy things and I finally felt better. And a month later, I met the love of my husband. And ever since then, my life has been a celebration every day. Not perfect. I have tons of challenges. I don't want to go into all my current issues, but it's not perfect. But I have a partner and I have my purpose and I know it's going to be okay.
That sounds like such an incredible, heart-wrenching story. It sounds like when you initially found out, you were experiencing a lot of anger and hesitation to go through with chemo. Can you tell me about what waking up was like, especially the year after, because you were still in pain and everyone had pretty much, for lack of a better word, abandoned you and you were very much alone. So what was it like waking up thinking, I didn't care whether I lived or not? Can you walk me through how you were able to put one foot ahead of the other when your mind was seeing things like this?
It was awful. It was hard to get out of bed. I just did it automatic. It wasn't with vigor and with energy. It was just, I kind of went on automatic and did what I needed to do. I was going to give up. And I say this in the book too, and it's worth repeating, through the illness, and I'm talking about the 2 years, because it really is the 2 years. Whether you're fighting cancer and you're trying to get the chemo out of your body, it's still illness. I never asked God to heal me. I was saying, look, take me if it's my time, but if it's not, then give me work to do. What is the work I'm supposed to do? What is the purpose? Why am I here? And I still had my kids and family and friends, and my older daughter likes to kind of kick my butt, and she wouldn't let me be in the pity party. And I think she kicked my butt quite a bit. And then my younger daughter, she made me laugh at it more. So we would do something and it'd be like, yes, but I just had cancer. And she's like, Mom, stop using the cancer card. Like, you can't use the cancer card anymore. And in the middle of the second set of chemo that it was really, really bad, it was my younger one's graduation, and I took her to Europe. They agreed to stop the chemo for 2 weeks. My daughter was hauling 50-pound suitcases up and down stairs in Munich, Dusseldorf, Amsterdam, and upstairs at hotels. And I just did it all. And over here then, but my daughter and I, we just went to the museums and we had fun. And yeah, I know I'm not answering your question because there's no good answer.
I think you are. To summarize, if I'm understanding correctly, you had a lot of responsibilities that kept you going. You had your mother who had Alzheimer's and your work. And so there were lots of people still depending on you. And I think you had this need to still show up for them. And then you had your daughters who forced you to have a positive attitude and also used humor to help you get through it. I think in our previous discussion, you talked about the ridiculous things people say when you have cancer that made you laugh and that helped you to laugh at the situation. Do you remember any of the dumb things people said to you?
I was joking with somebody whose wife had cancer, and we were saying we have to co-author a book about what to say to somebody who has cancer and what not to say, because I know it's hard. I know people don't know what to say. The cliches are the worst. Oh, God wouldn't give you anything you can't handle. If I'm at a dime for every time somebody said you're so strong, I'd be rich. Yeah, I'm not strong right now. I am falling apart. I need your strength. So when somebody says, you're so strong, you'll be fine, that is their way of going, I don't have to worry about you. It's their excuse for walking away. And it hurts, actually, because when you're fighting all this, you're not strong. You crumble. My poor daughter, I cried on her shoulder. She didn't deserve that. She's a senior in high school, but I should not have tried to reverse roles with her like my mother did. But you need people to lean on physically and figuratively. So using those cliches are not helpful. And the other thing that's not helpful is, oh, let me know if I can do anything for you. I don't have brain cells to try to figure out what to delegate to you. Thanks, but no thanks. But what is helpful, I learned to ask for help. I had to learn, and this is the big lesson of the cancer. It's like there's one thing I walked away, it is giving the other person a gift when you ask them for help. Like, who wouldn't help their friend if they needed it? I had people fly in and stay with me for a week, do my laundry, vacuum my floor because I couldn't. So people need other people. And when you're sick, you need them even more. So rather than saying, well, what can I do to help? Say, okay, I'm going to come over to your house and see what I can do to clean up. I'm going to help you with your laundry. They need help just doing daily activities, and it doesn't have to cost anything. So real help is just lending a hand. It's just doing very mundane things. Maybe it's going to the mailbox and getting them out for you. Maybe it's answering, sending thank you notes for people who have sent flowers or chocolate. Like, it's those very small things that you think about. You just don't have any brain cells left. Chemo kills your brain. It makes you foggy and fuzzy and dizzy and nauseous and weak. So hopefully that gives some guidance.
Yeah, I think it does. I think that's a really good clarification for those who want to help but are unsure of how to approach it. I think you also mentioned that being this close to dying also made you feel like you had this superpower, and it helped you to take bigger risks, like, for instance, climbing Mount Everest after that. And I was just curious if you are able to harness that same type of mindset today, and what you would advise women who haven't gone through a death-defying experience like cancer. How can they harness this type of mindset to really go after things that terrify them? Is there a way to do that or keep that mindset even when you've gone past that experience?
Yeah, and I obviously don't want other people to have to go through anything like what I went through. But there's two things I'm saying. One is, in a nutshell, keep things in perspective. Even as adults, we tend to think we have to do this. This is so important. One of my takeaways from the book is really figure out your values. Like, when we talked about purpose, and your values are usually very tightly aligned with purpose. Brene Brown does an excellent job at helping people in Dare to Lead to uncover their values and really distill it down. And then do an accounting. How do I spend my money, my time, my energy, my thoughts? Are they aligned with my values? And so when you align everything you do with your values, then you can keep things in perspective. So family really is the most important thing. It doesn't mean you don't work necessarily, but you make sure that you have quality and quantity of time with your family, because that's what you value. That's what's important to you. So maybe you don't take on that extra assignment. Maybe you don't volunteer for this extracurricular activity, because that would take away family time. So having a death-defying experience really makes you put things in perspective in terms of what's important. Anyone who has experienced the death or loss of a loved one, whether it's a friend or a family member, knows that moment when you go to that funeral, when you find out that they've passed. Wow, that really puts things in perspective. Everybody says that. So you don't have to have been the one that has died. Just remember that there's a dash between your birth and your death. What are you doing with that dash? Are you living your purpose and your values? And yes, we all have to cook dinner and clean the dishes and and take out the garbage, and there's these logistics and these mundane things. And there are things you have to do. And then there are things that are really important and longer term. And are you allocating your time and your energy and your body in a way that is aligned and allocated with your values and your purpose? I will say, when I was in my first marriage with young children, working my tail off at intense jobs, I still felt alone and I still felt lost. And I remember thinking to myself day after day, what is my core? I am working and I'm raising kids and I'm a wife and I'm this and that, but who am I? Like, I felt lost in the busyness of life. And I was in my 40s at this point, and I think that's when I started this exploration of purpose. So I was working hard. I was trying to climb the ladder and trying to juggle motherhood and trying to be a good wife and all these different things. I don't know, what's my core? Who am I? And so that's when I'm on a voyage, on a trip in my life to try to figure that out. And the economic downturn hit in the middle of that. And I pivoted from senior VP of a Fortune 100 company to consulting. And I had done consulting before, and I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed meeting new people and working across industries. And I did that for several years. And the last consulting was with Florida Virtual. And I just had oh my gosh, I can use my powers for good. I can use my organizational leadership here. I can help transform education with technology. So that just spoke to me. How can I repair the world? And my children were school aged. And so it just all kind of made sense that this is what they needed. This is what I needed. This is how I could make a difference. And I do talk about in the book that when you think about your purpose, it isn't about you. It's not about getting a bigger house or a fancier car or taking a fancy trip. It's about what impact you have on other people's lives, on helping make the world a better place. Your purpose is outside of yourself. And it wasn't until I found that I really pivoted. Adrenaline was, see, I can do it. And that all started to drift away. And it started being about, how am I contributing? How am I making a difference? What am I doing that's aligned? I found my core. And I'm not saying everybody finds it the same way or the same time, but that was my journey. That was my process. And it just happened. And ever since, for the last 15 years, I have found this energy and this purpose and passion around transforming education and helping every student learn, and not the same way. We all have different intelligences. We all have different ways of processing information. And some of us are more kinesthetic and some of us are more cerebral. And we need each student to understand and find out what their individual gifts and talents. So my hope is that people find out what their gifts and talents are and their purposes way earlier than I did. My life has just been so much better since I know that. I have challenges every day. But knowing that I have a core and what it is and how I can use whatever I have to help others, that is what powers my life now.
That's incredible. And I think I can very much relate to feeling lost. I think it's really important to find your purpose. Can you share one exercise that can help people focus in on something they could experiment with or try in order to find their purpose?
Sure. And I remember, probably when I was around your age, I read a book, What Everything You Ever Had Isn't Enough, by Rabbi Kushner. And it was like, I know, listen, I have children, I have a career. Why is it not enough? And it talks about how we need spiritual fulfillment as well. We need to have that. I don't care what religion or what culture you are. Everybody needs to find what they can do to help others. So I do have a diagram in the book, and it has purpose at the center. And it talks about thinking about what you're good at, because we all feel good when we can be valued for what we're already good at. We have strengths. So as an individual, you think about, what have I done that I felt good about? And if you can pinpoint those things, and it could be leading a project, it could be writing a program, it could be designing something, whatever it is that gives you like, oh, I feel good about that. We know when we feel good about something, right? But you want to turn that into, well, does the world need this? Am I playing a guitar song and nobody's listening? What does the world need? And what can you monetize? So your purpose and your passion don't always have to be monetized. They could be your hobby. I know people that love creating with woodworking, with creating beautiful pieces of art, but they have another job that they make their money and can do that. But you do want to find what is a creative outlet and what you feel that you're good at. And that usually becomes your purpose and your passion. And then if you're lucky enough to turn that into your avocation because you can get paid for it, then it's that much stronger. I think from a practice, the best way to figure that out is to try a lot of things. Try a lot of things at work. Try a lot of things at home, at hobbies. I think some of us, and me included, I'm guilty of this, I was just so focused on climbing the ladder, on moving upwards, being successful, and looking back, I wish I had just maybe not been so stressed about it and just tried different things. I became PMI certified. I love project management. I love process. So I was Six Sigma certified. And one of the things that I say in the book is every single day, make a difference, contribute value to your organization, earn your keep. But learn. Whether it is a good day or a bad day, there's always something to learn. Whether it's a good boss or a bad boss, there's always something to learn. And then when you have those arrows in your quiver, then you can use them forever. So you've learned these things, and there's always more to learn. Trust me, I am not young, and this last year of AI, I have learned quite a bit, and I love it. So that's another thing about finding your purpose and your passion is just be a sponge. Just keep soaking up. Read things you wouldn't normally read. Read things that are not in your normal day-to-day life. It expands your mind and your interest in the world, and it helps you figure out more about you in places you might not have looked. I remember I just landed in Australia. I was jet lagged, waiting for the hotel to find a room because it was too early for them. And there were some gentlemen sitting on the couch near me, and we all just started talking. And one of them is from India, and they were in Australia to meet with their guru. And they gave me the name of the guru and the book, and I downloaded it. And it's like, I never would have known about him before and his philosophies. And there's so many places and people to learn from. And that's really how we find out who we are, is by taking in more information. I believe in meditation. I believe in introspection, but I don't believe we have all the answers inside of us. I believe we have to be not only in this world, but a part of this world.
Wow, that's really profound. I really like that, because as I was listening to you talk about it, I was going to ask you a follow-up question about what if you're multifaceted and you have all these interests? How do you find your purpose if your list of things that is very long? So how do you focus on one? But I think you pretty much answered it. You try a lot of things, just experiment and follow your curiosities, not just introspective ways, but also through people. Let's say you're trying to test something that you're good at, you feel is valuable to others, but maybe you want feedback on whether that's valuable or not, and maybe you're not getting that feedback. So what do you say to someone that's maybe experimenting with something to find their purpose, and they're not really seeing the outputs that they want to and feeling discouraged? How do you approach those types of twists and turns when you're finding your purpose?
So I think it's about having your tribe, having your people. Especially women are good at this. Women are good at making friends and keeping friends and sharing information. It could be a professional network, but it could be a personal. It could be a women's group that you feel comfortable sharing with. I've been involved in things like this. I've been advisor to many women starting up businesses and providing feedback and guidance. And you really want to make sure that they're not just yes manning. You want questions, you want input, and you want real feedback. So I think it's about who you surround yourself with and how authentic you are so that you're inviting them to be authentic.
That's wonderful. What would you say to people that aren't ready to take these risks and experiments and are maybe feeling too stuck in their current situation or their lives to actually go after finding their purpose?
I totally understand. I can empathize. I've definitely had those feelings at different parts of my life. But recently, I gave the presentation about my book to students at the University of Tokyo in Japan. And in Japan, the culture is very harmonious, and people don't like to stand out. They like to just blend. And this brave young woman stood up and said, "Sometimes I feel self-doubt. What do you do about that?" And my heart went out to her. And I said, "Yes, I feel self-doubt every day." You can't stop the self-doubt. It comes up. But what you can do is talk to it and say, "I'm going to do it anyway. Okay, I hear you. Now let me understand, why is there self-doubt? Is there a risk? Is there issues? Is something I need to mitigate? Is there a concern? Okay, got it. Check." And it's also about being rational. Like, is this a good time in my life to take a risk, to take a chance? Have I figured out the costs and the potential advantages, the pros and the cons? As an adult, as a full-grown woman, have you done the analysis that this is the right time, the right place, and the right thing? If not, just like you would in business, gather more information, collect anecdotal as well as data. So you want data points. Is this the right thing? Is there a market for this? Is this a good idea? And think about that as your personal life and your professional life. And really analyze, both from quantitative and a qualitative perspective, if this is a good decision. And if it is, and you're still scared, think about what you're scared. But I always say courage is not fearlessness. Courage is knowing you're scared, mitigating the risks, and doing it anyway. So sometimes you have to just dig deep and say, you know what? I have figured this all out. I have put it down in a spreadsheet or on paper. And you can tell yourself, I have mitigated those risks. It's about figuring out whether they're psychological or whether they're real. And if they're real, don't ignore them. I am not saying, well, no, you've got everything you need. Just push all that aside. No, figure it out, mitigate the challenges, do all the work. And then once you've done that, then you can be confident in stepping forward and taking this risk, knowing that even having done all your homework, it still has some percentage of chance of working and some percentage chance of not working. And if it doesn't, then it's a learning opportunity. What didn't go well? Why? How can I do better? It isn't a statement about who you are. It's a learning opportunity. And it's so hard for us to take failures or setbacks as learning opportunities. But that's what they are. That's what they are. When anything happens that you don't like, you feel like, I deserve this. No. Why did this happen? What can I do differently? What part do I own? It's not always somebody else's fault. What do I own? How can I do better? I've always told people that reported to me, you can make mistakes, but you have to own them and you have to learn from them. So manage yourself that way.
I really love that. I think the part that resonated with me was trying to investigate into where the source of the fear is coming from, because oftentimes, especially if you've experienced trauma, you're in this fight or flight mode. And so you have a tendency to perceive a lot of things as threats when they aren't threats. And it's a habit that's formed from a traumatic past to view these opportunities as threats when they're not. And that's just a way that you protected yourself throughout your life. It's really insightful to say, hey, let's sit down and examine this fear. Where is it coming from? Is it a real threat versus something that you've made up? I think that was a really insightful statement.
So one of the things I learned in one of the workshops I took when I was in my early 30s is that we make decisions when we're young that help us survive, but they're not necessarily the decision that's going to help us thrive later in life. So for example, I had to suppress any emotion. I had to suppress feeling till I was whatever age. I mean, I think I did that for a very long time. I couldn't name emotions. I couldn't feel emotions. I just kept going. My kids tease me that I always say functional and effective, let's just keep going. And it wasn't until I was getting divorced that I had this aha that I had never actually felt loved. That was a feeling. I had never really felt it. And I owned some of that. I wasn't allowing myself to feel it. I couldn't blame everybody else around me and say, well, you didn't love me. No, I didn't let myself feel loved. And that opened up a floodgate. And that means I chose people to be around that I didn't accept love from. Or I chose people that were emotionally unavailable, right? That couldn't give love. But I learned that that suppression of feeling and emotion wasn't going to help me thrive later. I'm sure there's other people out there like me that just have been suppressing. And I had to learn to feel because I was missing out on a lot of life because of that. So when you say not knowing whether your doubts and your fears are real or not, think about, when did I start doing this? When did I practice that? When did that happen that I was afraid of taking chances? And it usually goes back to something in your childhood that helped you survive then, but you can rethink with your adult perspective. Go back into your inner child and say, well, why didn't you do that? Okay, I get it. That helped you then. Does it help me now? Is it serving me now? Not feeling didn't serve me as an adult. It made me keep people away. And there's lots of other things that I did because it helped me survive that didn't serve me as an adult. And you're at a pivotal age. I mean, you're about to turn 40, and you are really at that age where you can separate. You still remember enough about your younger years that you need to kind of go through and think about what lessons you learned, and are they still true? Are they serving you well now or not? And you have the power to undo those, to go, inner child, thank you for doing that. You did the right thing at the time. And now I'm going to do this. Now I'm going to make this conscious choice to look at these things differently. I am a good person. I am worth it. And I can be successful.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that is very, very powerful. I think taking the time out to examine the thought processes that helped you survive, but no longer can help you moving forward.
You want to thrive.
Right. I think that's a great distinction that you made between the past versus how you approach the future. And you can't use the same set of tools because you've outgrown it. They no longer work for you, as you said. It's very insightful. Yeah, I love that message. I appreciate you being so vulnerable today and sharing all these stories. It's incredibly inspirational. And your book, Empowered Framing Your Narrative, it's out now. It was released on March 27th, 2024. If there's one takeaway you want people to walk away with after listening to this, what would it be?
I want to explain the title, which is not always intuitive. And hopefully now that you've heard so many stories, it does make sense. So when I say frame your narrative, when you tell your story, it's about what you overcame. You're the hero of your own story. You're not the victim. This didn't happen to me. Yeah, my dad did this, my mom did that, this cancer did. I overcame. I'm the hero of my story. I have framed my narrative in a way where I like how I am in it, and it's a positive message. And by doing that, I am owning my power. So I'm not saying, well, my father did this, so I'm like that. I don't know. I decided how I am going to be and who I am, and then I'm going to make a difference. I'm owning my power, and that means that I'm using it to empower others. And that means you. I love talking with you, but it also means all the readers and listeners. So you are empowering yourself, and then you can empower others.
I love that. Thank you so much, Serena. I really appreciate your time and your vulnerability.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed the episode, please take a moment to leave a glowing review. It would make my whole day if you did that. And please share this with your friends and family. Your support means more than you know. Seriously, thank you.